Hello, I'm Dan Curry from the Deeds of God website. Today I wanted to talk about a miracle which happened in the United States of America in the state of Georgia in 1864. A lot of Americans, a lot of people around the world that are Christian aren't familiar with just how many great deeds of God have occurred since the crucifixion of Christ. There's been a lot of them from every century. But the one at Andersonville is clearly one of the more interesting ones from my point of view. I like hearing it. The situation that brought it about is that the American Civil War was underway. It was 1864, so there was only about a year left in the war, but nobody knows when a war is going to end when it's ongoing, and that's the way they were. But there was a blockade around the South which had cut short a lot of the supplies that they had received from sea, and in the South they were having a lot of troubles getting supplies, needed supplies to their soldiers. So as far as prisoners, northern prisoners, they didn't have any particular reason to be disposed to be especially liberal with them. But a prison that they built in 1864 near Andersonville, Georgia, and it was called Camp Sumpter, or Sumpter Camp. It was about 25 acres, fenced in with an inner fence. It was one of those situations where if you cross the first fence trying to get out or escape to the second, they'll shoot you, so you couldn't cross the inner fence. It didn't have much for buildings. I don't think it had anything at all in any of the pictures I've seen. And there was, upwards of 25,000, 30,000 men at a time. I think there was 45,000 people altogether, roughly, prisoners, that were housed within those fences, inside of Andersonville prison during the year, roughly a year that it was in operation. And out of those 45,000 total that were in there, some passed in, some passed out, but I think about 14,000 of them died. Andersonville prison had such a high death rate that after the war, the only person the North supposedly went after for war crimes and actually hung was a man named Henry Worse, who ran Andersonville prison. It was a bad place. The prisoners drank from a spring. So the spring flowed under the fence, flowed across the prison yard, and then out under the fence again. And it was probably not that bad of a spring, but the men were cooped up in such numbers that they were like chickens walking around in a chicken coop. There was no real space between them. They were just milling around everywhere. They all had to use the same spring. And the guards camped on it upstream before it entered the prison. It was the guard camping spring. And what got thrown into the spring or done to the water of the spring, well, there's a lot of stories about that. A lot of things got thrown into that water, from what people say. But it gave such terrible gastrointestinal diseases to the prisoners that they were in pain. They had, naturally the diarrhea problems, and there was no real sanitation at the camp either. At one point, at least, they had asked for shovels to dig privies and hadn't been granted those. And apparently the dirt in most areas was hard pan red clay that was sort of like rock. Nothing you could really dig a deep hole in easily at all. So there wasn't much for sanitation. They kind of used the slough at the bottom of the place where the creek ran out, from what I've heard. Just had to use the bathroom out in the open. And as far as food, apparently it was a lot of cornbread. The general story, bad cornbread with worms. Well, they said that was often the case there, that they had a lot of cornbread, and a lot of times it was bad cornbread. And so that was kind of the situation at Andersonville prison. It was kind of an open-air idea. People had tents. The Northerners weren't any angels in this scenario. For a time, when new Northern prisoners would arrive, there got to be gangs. Everything was in such short supply that there got to be gangs that would jump them and steal their provisions, their blankets, or things like that they needed. And at one point, some of the Northerners got with the guards and said, could you let us capture these people and try them in sort of a military court? Will you take care of the sentence if we, find them guilty? And they said yes, they'd do that. So some of the Northerners jumped these gang members, and they tried them and found them guilty and had them hung. And the Confederate Army, which is the name of the Southern Army, they were willing to take care of that problem, and that's a plus for them. They were decent enough people in a very hard situation. The war was a huge struggle in the South. There was a lot of Christians in the South, probably more than in the North. But anyway, the way it worked out, it was a terrible prison. Terrible, terrible, terrible. They say it's kind of unequaled in the Civil War, and if you've ever seen pictures, you can go online and see photos of these guys. Some of them were so skinny by the time that the prison was retaken that they actually look like skeletons walking. I think they're just about the full equal of some of the concentration camps' worst photos from World War II. Well, conditions were so very bad in Andersonville that men started joining together in prayer. You know, they're prisoners, they're stuck, the situation's horrible, and they started meeting in prayer, but it became more of a revival meeting. You know, as the days went by, the weeks went by, they began to pray for decent water. Like, God, would you send some rain? You know, they could catch the rain in their tent. They would have clean water to drink for a little while. It would clear them up a little. Maybe they'd live. You know, in the worst of the days, they said about 100 people a day were dying and being taken outside of the prison, a good ways off, where there was a pit. And they would just throw the dead in and cover them over, and the next day they would throw more dead in and cover them over them. And, you know, apparently it would equal up to 100 people a day. Now, that's a lot of people if you think about it. So, yeah, they started praying, and the rain started coming. Now, rain comes in Georgia. You know, Georgia's a nice state. It's very forested. It gets very hot in the summer. As spring rolled into summer, they started getting some rains, and they may have been natural rains, but, you know, they were coming just as the guys prayed for them to come, and people started seeing a connection. So bigger groups, larger groups, more groups started forming to pray, and some people remembered Scripture and preached it, and others, you know, prayed together for an end to the war, safety for their families, whatever men might come up with. And the rains just came and came with greater volume. People really felt like God was answering their prayer from what I've read. And in fact, one time, the rain was so bad it turned the little creek that ran through their stockade into almost a river. And it washed away all the nasty, you know, they've been using the bottom of that for a bathroom for a long time. It washed everything away. It crowded them up into the high corner, you know, just so they wouldn't get washed away. It even blew out the corner of the fence, but they could have ran away, but they were all too weak or too scared, you know. I mean, they were in bad shape. The guards could have probably stopped them anyway, but yeah, it blew out the corner of the prison fence. That's a lot of water. They were praying for rain, and they got it. So I guess they just kept going with that, praying a lot to God for help, for the end of the war. And a remarkable thing happened in August of 1864. On a pretty nice day, there was a cloud that started coming at them from a long ways away, such that it was an unusual cloud, and they began to watch it. As it got closer and closer, apparently they were remarking about what a strange cloud it was, almost as if it was on a mission towards them. I've heard it described as kind of a iron gray triangular cloud. I don't know what it looked like, of course, and there was a lot of storm energy in it. It was sort of an individual cloud, you know, solitary cloud, not a bank of clouds. And as it came and came, they more and more began to watch it because of its strangeness, and it started to seem that something odd was happening to them. And as it came closer and closer, eventually it was over the place where the pit was, where the dead were buried. Now, all these things that have gone on at Andersonville, God has watched. He's been prayed to a lot about it. Jesus has heard the cries of his believers. Well, they say, and this is like, you know, 20-some thousand witnesses have this story. They say that the cloud came and it stopped over the pit, a ways off out of the prison, and quit moving. Just kind of parked over the pit. So they're all looking at this, and it's not so far away now, and they know where it stopped, and they're remarking on how it's not moving. And everybody knows, even the guards, that this is not a normal cloud. Then it started moving again until it was over them. And apparently it was a very strong and ominous cloud, and it had such energy and power in it that it was frightening. And so I guess they're looking up at the bottom of the cloud's features, you know, seeing it's not moving. It's parked over them. And all of a sudden a giant crash of thunder that was likened to 1,000 cannons going off. You know, these are Civil War guys. They knew the sound of cannons. But some people said it was like 1,000 cannons going off. Very loud thunder. They say it knocked some guys to the ground. So then they were all terrified. I mean, there's nowhere to go. And here comes this giganto lightning strike. Just dirt flies, steam flies. And then they're really scared. They have nowhere to hide from this. But that kind of marked the end of it. Then the cloud, it started moving again. And it moved off over and past them. And soon enough it was gone. But people started yelling, "Come here, look, or, you know, things like this. And they went down to the place where the lightning had struck the ground, and there was a smoking hole kind of place there. It had tunneled and burrowed. It was a large lightning strike, and water was pouring out of it. cool, clean, drinkable water, non-diseased water. It was essentially a 10-gallon per minute flow. It was a new spring created by the lightning. It had hit some artesian source that was down there, poked a hole to its, some place where it was under enough pressure to roll out onto the ground. And now these people had 10 gallons per minute of clean, healthy, good drinking water to drink the rest of the time that they were at Andersonville prison. And the Southerners, to their credit, did not take any rock and go plug it. They just left it be. Today Andersonville is a park, and you can go and see the building that they have built over the spring. You can look at that on the internet also and hear the story, or you can go to their website and read it. It's a remarkable deed of God. I'm Dan Curry from the Deeds of God website. I hope you'll visit. I hope you'll tell other people about the great deeds God has done. Thank you.